Well, thank you for the opportunity, Professor Wilhite and Kim Morrow from the School of Natural Resources. As I indicated a few minutes ago, the thoughts that I'm going to offer today are based upon the recent policymaking experience I've had working within Mayor Chris Beitler's office in the city of Lincoln, working with the city council and our departments and Lincoln Electric System and so on. Right off the bat, as you can tell from the discussion here, the release of the report last fall, almost a year ago, has been a real game changer for those of us who are involved in this line of work. This report has now provided the nail in the coffin, whatever metaphor we want to come up with here. Maybe that's the wrong metaphor for climate change, I don't know. For any need to continue to debate whether climate change is real or will impact our lives in Nebraska today and in the future. So I'm honored to be able to talk about what the sectors can be doing at this juncture. So my brief talk today is focused on today's modern and very critical responsibility for urban and rural communities to incorporate planning for climate change into our daily operations. And our voters and taxpayers frankly expect nothing less. In poll after poll, including the most recent Rural Nebraska poll that Professor Wilhite mentioned, a strong majority of taxpayers and voters feel that state and local governments, not just the federal government, must prepare for and respond to climate change. So in Mayor Chris Beitler's administration over the last 6 years, we accepted this scientific and political reality. While nothing in policy or politics is ever easy, nor should it be, given our commitment to an engaged and active democracy, and Lincoln can be a rather engaged and active democracy, Lincoln is taking action in many ways. But this commitment to planning and action, though, faces quite the challenge. As Professor Wilhite described, it is no longer reasonable to plan our activities based on historical weather patterns. As we all know, we are all living through years that are among the hottest, wettest, and driest in recorded history. So in this context, we have to remember that Lincoln, in particular, is a dynamic modern city with a remarkable diversity of people, culture, and entrepreneurial spirit. We added over 330,000 people, not 300,000 people, 30,000 people in the last 7 years alone, which is the size of most mid-sized or larger Nebraska cities. And we're set to be home to over 400,000 residents by 2050. So what Lincoln does as a fast-growing city has a direct impact on climate change, and climate change is directly impacting Lincoln. When we build our neighborhoods and our shopping malls, our arenas and our office buildings, our natural surfaces changed greatly, with concrete and asphalt absorbing sunlight and releasing heat. When we build our streets and our transportation systems, we increase greenhouse gas production and emissions. When we move energy and water across our expanding surface areas, we burn fossil fuels and can inefficiently waste these resources. All of this at our local scale, but one inexorably tied to the rest of our region, nation, and planet. And in our city day-to-day operations, and again, the city of Lincoln has 2,500 employees and literally dozens of operations, we burn immense amounts of fuel, use considerable materials, and create, as you can imagine, a lot of waste. But again, that's what city government does. So therefore, these activities are what local government does, and if the public is expecting action, public is expecting action in these areas. In other words, municipal government and what it does is right at the intersection of climate change mitigation and adaptation policy. Our local actions can and do lead on to broader cultural, economic, and behavioral change that will benefit all of us today and generations tomorrow, as well as actually deliver adaptation and mitigation results. So planning and looking towards these future of many more sizzling triple-digit days, more severe storms, extended droughts, really just underscores the dimensions of the local planning challenge and what we need to do in response. Well, what we do know is this: cities across the country have responded and are vigorously addressing this wide range of adaptation and mitigation needs and strategies. We know this because Lincoln, among other things, is a member of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which has been formed to create a national support network for local policymakers in this area. And these efforts have sprung from other national policymaking initiatives, including the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreements of both 2007 and 2014. Mayor Beitler has signed the 2007 agreement. The 2014 agreement is slightly different, but yet we are an active enrollee, shall we say, in that agreement. Lincoln is also working with other cities in our region through the Heartland Regional Sustainability Network. This network includes representatives of Kansas City, Lawrence, Oklahoma City, Des Moines, Columbia, Iowa City, Dubuque, the list is pretty long, and other area cities that are focused on what we can do locally to mitigate and adapt to climate change. One important recent regional project of the network has been a study that we have engaged in amongst at least 4 of our states, focused on how cities in these states can work with state-level climate scientists to help understand the changing climate specific to each area and think of appropriate governing responses. Well, this project has been ably supported, obviously, by the UNL report that Professor Will has described, but we also were able to work with Martha Shulsky and the High Plains Regional Climate Center, which was involved in the report that Professor Will has described, to understand more about the climate change impacts in more specificity, including historical patterns versus likely projections for lower rainfall, higher temperature days, more severe storms. So this final report is ultimately going to provide a template for communities like Lincoln, like Kansas City, and so on, to use to analyze our daily city operations, municipal operations, and plan for climate change responses. And it serves as an excellent example of drawing a tighter relationship between the local scientific communities in these cities and states and our local policy responses, which I found, in my experience, to be greatly lacking at times. That lo and behold, we have some of the best resources in the nation in our backyard in Lincoln, and we weren't necessarily using them as thoroughly as we needed to. So with all this in mind, the City of Lincoln has engaged in an action strategy to adapt to the changing climate and both its present and future impacts in many ways. First of all, we have a strong overarching policy for carbon emission reduction, environmental policy, and sustainability policy, and several people in this room were involved in creating that. Mayor Chris Byler's Executive Order 83009. That order put into effect a wide variety of environmental and sustainability initiatives in the city, in energy, water, transportation, waste, and other areas that are all intended to lower carbon emissions and really are, in effect, climate, even though in the years it was put together, we're not necessarily thought of as climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies, but that's what they are. Here's 2 quick examples of how Lincoln, the City of Lincoln is acting to build on its climate adaptation and resilience into its policies that relate to that overarching policy. In the summer of 2012, as has been described here, the drought that affected the entire state had a particularly strong impact on the City of Lincoln. You probably all know that the City of Lincoln receives all of its water, its drinking water, from wells located near Ashland, near the Platte River. So, you know, in that sense, as the Platte River goes, so goes the City of Lincoln's water supply. But as you can tell from the information Professor Will I gave you, that was obviously a difficult situation. And despite pleas from the mayor and city leaders in July of 2012 to practice greater water conservation, including alternate days of outdoor water use, and so on, it was evident that an emergency was at hand and that water demand had to go down immediately. We had reached a point that had not been seen since the days of the Dust Bowl. It was quite a crisis and emergency situation. The only available legal tool at the time, and I was in the I didn't like the position to be in at that time, having to figure this out, that we didn't have very many legal options at the time to deal with this, was to impose a water emergency that allowed outdoor water use only on certain days with violations of misdemeanor under city code. Well, that effort did lower water use dramatically, as you can imagine, with folks being threatened with a misdemeanor citation. And the community did respond in a number of ways, but it also meant that many hundreds of people in Lincoln were turned into criminals overnight because they were violating the water code. So that winter, after the river recovered and water demand was once again seasonally low, it was clear to city policymakers that there were at least 3 lessons from this near catastrophe. 1, more water needed to be found, stored, and available when drought conditions appeared again and recurred. Secondly, the water emergency system needed to be better calibrated, less criminalized, and built around people's market responses to water pricing. That was a very important lesson that we learned from that episode. And 3, deep and significant water conservation is not just something that comes about when there's a 2012 drought. It in fact must become more of a social and cultural norm in what we do in our water policies, and built more on ensuring future resource needs. Well, in my opinion, that response, the response that followed, has been a model for the climate change adaptation that urban sectors can do in Nebraska into the future. The new water management plans for the city now are organized in a sense that they will move much more quickly to address water emergencies through early warning systems and things of that nature. It decriminalizes but still stigmatizes wasteful water use, and, for my opinion, imposes new conservation and drought pricing and rates far more aggressively and early in a water shortage situation to get people to use their water to get them to lower their water use more quickly to be more efficient. And I think lastly, most importantly, there's now far more of a consensus that lowering water use is good both for the system now and for the future, from irrigators, homeowners, businesses, and civic leaders. We have a lot more community education awareness work to do in Lincoln on this front, as well as policies that incentivize far lower water use while keeping in consideration how do you pay for a water system that is as extensive as we have in Lincoln. But the 2012 drought has moved all of this forward quickly, and I think notably as an example for policy into the future. Now, a second example that I'm going to offer you today, as you think about how urban and rural sectors and communities can respond and adapt to climate change, is the work we did around our stormwater best management practices, which were approved. A new ordinance was approved by the Lincoln City Council in 2014. The way this was done was that in 2012, the City of Lincoln convened a community-wide clean water task force which had representatives from industry, business, developers, neighborhoods, the whole polyglot of folks that we have here in Lincoln that we try to bring together on a regular basis to make policy, to discuss and recommend new stormwater development policies that would keep more rainwater in our local soils and lands, lower the pollution that is being shed into local creeks and rivers, and lower the risk of flooding, obviously directly related to the severe storm scenarios that we are obviously all seeing. Well, on the one hand, this effort was boosted by the reality of high E. coli rates in local streams. People didn't like to hear about going for walks down an Antelope Creek and realizing that they were exposing themselves to some of the highest E. coli rates around. And on the other, by pending new regulations from the EPA. There's a lot of new clean water regulations, independent from maybe what you've heard about recently in the news, regarding streams and pollution and so on. What it did was it presented the opportunity, in combination with climate change as an active part of the issue, to have a community conversation about the viability and effectiveness of a more green infrastructure in developments and neighborhoods across the city. So the task force met over the course of literally over a year, incorporated a variety of ideas and so on, and created a set of recommendations key to seeing a strong increase in the use of bioswales, holding ponds, rain gardens, green roofs, and other components of a far more natural, cost-effective, and ultimately, frankly, far more effective watershed system, one that not only gets stronger over time, but fosters many positive environmental and climate change-related adaptation outcomes. Obviously, not a whole lot of that is in place in Lincoln just yet, but we saw some of the evidence of that with our rains and our flooding in May, in which much of the Antelope Creek redevelopment features many of these features I just described, and held the floodwaters, in an extremely impressive way. So while the ordinance, the final ordinance, is really slightly less demanding than the task force recommended, the adoption of these green infrastructure requirements means the City of Lincoln will grow and redevelop in a way not with concrete culverts and parking lots and similar traditional means of development, but with more natural landscaping, including permeable pavement and things that keep the water in Lincoln and prevents the kinds of damage from severe storms that we are going to see even more of as we go forward. So these are two examples of what's possible, and are about a few of the dozens that the City of Lincoln is doing and embarking on, as well as other urban environments and communities in the state. And you'll see many more of these in the months and years ahead, because there's no question that local policymakers in Lincoln and in other communities are seizing the opportunity to better prepare for climate changes that we're experiencing in the future. So you'll see them, not all these adaptation strategies, not just in, shall we say, the kinds of examples I just gave you now, but in other efforts that may seem innocuous but are very critical, such as snow removal plans, waste disposal system changes and recycling increases, and probably very significantly and under the radar, city building codes and related efforts. So there will continue to be a need at the urban level to strategize and prioritize, but there will be action in Lincoln, I can assure you of that, now and into the future, because of the policy momentum that's been put into place by Mayor Byler and his administration. So thank you. I look forward to our continuing discussion today. And now I'd like to introduce Chris Anderson, who's the city administrator at Central City, which has been actively engaged in many of these adaptation strategies at a more rural community level.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Chris Anderson, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some energy initiatives that we've taken on in Central City and the reasons why we've done them. We've had some underlying principles in our consideration of energy use in Central City. And to begin with, we're a pretty small town. We're about 3,000 people. And what that means is that we have the ability to be pretty nimble. When we decide that we want to try out some new energy program, typically it's a process of me going to the city council and saying, I've got this idea, and they say, well, that sounds good, go do it. So we're not going through a whole lot of commissions and boards and things, so we've been able to get some policies put into place pretty quickly. As the owner of all of our utilities, we operate the water, the sewer, the natural gas, the electricity. We have the policy that it's not our role to try and maximize how much money we draw from our customers. It's our role to have our customers purchase as little as possible from us. And that's maybe a bit of a counterintuitive approach, but we're part of the citizenry. We're not against them. So that's the role that we're trying to take. We do not engage in energy programs for symbolic reasons. So when we consider an energy program, it must be economically advantageous to the community. We need to either find cost savings for the city operation or cost savings for our customers. And we also believe that every dollar that a Central City resident saves on energy is a dollar that stays in our local economy. So rather than a dollar going to basically a coal plant in Wyoming, it might be spent at the local grocery store. The first project that we engaged in a few years back, specifically for energy conservation, is LED streetlights. So we replaced every one of the residential streetlights in town and another 20 highway streetlights back in 2012. We reduced our energy consumption by 221,000 kilowatt hours per year. That's about $13,000 a year in savings to us on our electrical costs. We reduced our annual greenhouse gas by 146 metric tons of carbon dioxide. And we received an energy efficiency block grant that covered 75% of that cost. So that was really the driver that allowed this project to happen. It gave us a 4-year payback on this just off of the energy costs. We also have significant cost savings in that our crews are not out fixing streetlights and doing a lot of maintenance on those. You know, there is a bit of a criticism that this was done basically with federal money and that it maybe would not have been viable on its own. But one of the important things about this project is that we purchased these streetlights for about $500 a piece back in 2012. And now you can buy these streetlights here for well under $200. So somebody has to be the early adopter. Somebody's got to be the ones that buy those first streetlights and get the prices down for everybody else. Another project we did, we were the second city to partner with Energy Pioneer Solutions. This is a company out of Hastings. What they do is they took a look at the utility histories on every one of our customers in town, and where they were able to calculate unusually high utility use, they would approach those people and say, let us come into your house and do an energy audit. If we find some things that we can do to reduce your energy use, we'll perform those things for you. So we will seal windows, or we'll put in insulation, or we'll do a lot of different things. And then they place a loan. They do a loan with that property owner, and then that loan is put on your utility bill each month. And so we collect that loan over 48 months for Energy Pioneers. And the deal that we had with them was, in all cases, the amount of that loan on the utility bill had to be less than what they were saving each month. So they saw immediate cost savings. When the loan is paid off, they'll have a more energy efficient house. And it's a real win for everybody there. The next program I wanted to talk about was our heating and air conditioning program. So we will pay for the heating and air system in any residence in town to be replaced up to $5,000. You have to put an energy efficient unit in, and these standards that we used when we started this are not great standards now, so we'll probably need to adjust those some. But we pay to put that heating and air system in. We do a 48-month loan at a 2% interest rate, and again, that becomes a utility bill adder. So it's not unusual for us to have somebody come in the winter with a small house that's old, that's very inefficient, and they'll come in with a $600 or $700 utility bill. And we say, hey, that you need to take a look at your heating and air system and see if you could participate in this program. And in most cases, they have a greater reduction in their utility bill than what that loan payment is. They've got a new heating and air system, and they are being more energy efficient. We've issued 35 loans to date, and we have not had any defaults, which was a bit of a surprise to me. So that's been good for the program. Another project that we did more recently, along with a number of other communities in Nebraska, was to purchase our first electric vehicle. This is a Nissan Leaf that we purchased along with the charge point station. It was purchased with another grant from the Nebraska Environmental Trust. There are others, I think, in the room that have taken advantage of this. But it allows us to be a zero emission driver when we combine this with our solar panels that I'll talk about. But we ended up purchasing this Nissan Leaf for about $8,000. So this, again, was an easy pitch to make to the governing body that we were going to have an $8,000 car. Our staff uses it to drive around town if we're doing building inspections or going to the bank or taking short trips. It's very cheap to recharge it. If you go and use our charging station there, we don't charge. So you can bring your electric car and charge at no cost. And it was kind of another way that we were trying to reduce the energy consumption of our community. Our most recent project is our Central City Solar project. Earlier in the year, we became the first community in Nebraska to have a community solar garden. This was a pretty exciting project for us and one that we've really enjoyed. And some of the reasons that we did this project, first of all, we wanted to get in front of this issue rather than respond to it, because I think you're going to see rooftop solar installation coming to Nebraska fairly soon. It's in other parts of the country, and the only reason it's not here, in my opinion, is because the low-hanging fruit is in Arizona or California or places that have much higher electric rates. But we believe it's coming here. We had a concern that private vendors would come in, maybe sweep through town, put all these panels on the roofs, and who knows what kind of quality of installation they do. So we could have an issue with panels falling off, or having issues where when that happens, they're going to call the city. We're going to get that call, and they're going to say, what are you going to do about our solar panel that fell off the roof? And we want to get in front of that issue. Also, we have issues with zoning and land use. So if you put panels on your roof and your neighbor plants a tree or puts up a house that's taller than yours, what are we going to do when people come to the city and say, what are you going to do about the tree that's shading my solar panels that I spent all this money on? So we did want to get in front of that issue. Also, the unattractive installations. So if a company sweeps through town and puts up all these solar panels, is that going to be beneficial to the community? Is that going to make our community look better? Or is it going to make it look worse? We don't have any control on how that's going to happen, but we wanted to have a place where, rather than put it on your roof, we can provide another place for you to do it. Some more reasons that we got into solar. One was that while it's not a primary motivator for us, we do like the idea of reducing carbon emissions and the environmental benefits that we're talking about today. It's consistent with our policy of reducing energy consumption. So that is something that we are focused on, is reducing as a community the amount of energy that we're using. We also know that when you plug something into your wall and use that electric out of the outlet, maybe 30 to 40% of the energy that went into that plant to generate that power is actually getting to your plug. So if you are producing that energy locally, that's a much more efficient way to do that, in our opinion. Also, the expiration of federal tax credits. So we are taking advantage of the tax credits through a third party, and those are scheduled right now to expire in 2016. So there is talk that those credits will be renewed, but in the event that they're not, we want to have our solar projects completed by then. Probably the biggest reason that we considered solar was as a hedge. So right now, the cost of us producing electricity in our solar garden is a little bit higher than what we pay for it from NPPD, but that price is fixed for the life of that project, essentially. And if the price is a little bit higher right now, it's not going to be too long before it's lower. And to have the opportunity to take a piece of our energy consumption and fix that price for 20, 25, 30 years was attractive to us. We also like the idea of being, well, basically the attention that we're getting. So we're a small town out in the middle of Nebraska in the cornfields in the middle of the state, and when we get articles in the World Herald and the Journal Star and things like that, that's good for our community, and it's gotten us a lot of attention in Central City for this particular project. We're also looking at economic development possibilities with this. So if a company came to Central City today, we could say, well, if you locate here, we will give you this portion of the solar garden, and you can say that you have green energy coming to your business. So that may be attractive to somebody at some point. So what did we do? How did we do this? These are some of the solar panels as they were being put up. We partnered with a local company called Messner Development because the city can't capture tax credits. So Messner Development puts these solar panels up. He takes the tax credit and then he sells the panels back to us for the difference. So that's how we got into the game. Each one of these rows is 25 kilowatts of solar generation. We started with a single row of 25 kilowatts back in December of 14 as a test project. There's a lot of assumptions that go into the financial analysis on solar. How many sunlight hours you're going to get, if you're going to have downtime, things like that. So we wanted to test those assumptions before we put real money into it. We put up 25 kilowatts at first. We added another 25 after the assumptions played out favorably. We added another 50 kilowatts when 2 more businesses said we'd like to have some panels out there. In the last month, we've added another 100 kilowatts for more interest in the community. So we have 200 kilowatts producing and on the grid today. We've also partnered with the city of Gothenburg. We've applied for a grant, again with the Nebraska Environmental Trust, to help with our next project, which will be 500 kilowatts in each of our 2 communities. And our goal right now is to reach 2 megawatts of solar panels by the end of 2016. And so for us, that starts to become a pretty significant amount of the energy demand for the community. So solar has been a good project for us. But again, we go back to the concept that it has to be financially feasible. It has to be financially advantageous. And we're not making any symbolic gestures here. But I think one of the things that we've learned in each of the projects that we've done is that we can take steps to help the environment. We can take steps to be green, but it pays for us. It's financially feasible. We've saved money, and it's not something that you have to do just for the sake of saying I'm green or putting a green sticker on our website or something like that. So these programs have all been advantageous to us. I'm sure there's a number of other directions we're going to go. And I think you're going to see the solar concept in particular start to catch on in a lot of the smaller communities and then the rural communities around the state. So those are some of the projects that we've dealt with, and I'll be happy to field questions as we move on. Thank you.